There are moments in the history of ideas when discovery feels inevitable, as if the universe itself is ready to reveal a secret. And then there are moments when that same secret appears twice, in two different places, inside two different minds, almost at the same time. What happens then is not celebration, it is conflict. This is the story of one of the greatest intellectual battles in history. A battle not fought with armies or weapons, but with letters, manuscripts, pride, and silence. It is the story of Isaac Newton and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, two brilliant minds, one revolutionary idea, and a war that would divide mathematics for generations. In the 17th century, Europe was changing rapidly. The old worldview, shaped by ancient authorities, was beginning to crack. New telescopes revealed moons around distant planets. New experiments questioned long-held beliefs about motion, light, and matter. The universe was no longer static. It was moving, and movement demanded a new kind of mathematics. How do you describe motion that is constantly changing? How do you measure speed at a single instant? How do you calculate areas under curves that never sit still? The mathematics of the past could not answer these questions. Something new was needed. Isaac Newton was a quiet, intensely private man. Born prematurely in England, he grew up withdrawn, suspicious, and deeply focused. He did not trust easily. He did not share freely. He worked obsessively, often in isolation. When a plague closed the universities, Newton retreated to the countryside. And there, away from society, something extraordinary happened. In solitude, Newton began to think about change itself, not average motion, not total distance, but motion at a single instant. He imagined quantities that flowed, that changed continuously. He developed methods to analyze these changes, to break motion into infinitely small steps, and to rebuild it again. This way of thinking would become calculus, but Newton did not publish it. He wrote notes. He filled notebooks. He refined his ideas in private, and then he locked them away. Meanwhile, far from England, in Germany, another mind was working. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was very different from Newton. Where Newton was withdrawn, Leibniz was social. Where Newton avoided controversy, Leibniz thrived on correspondence. He believed knowledge should be shared, debated, and improved collectively. Leibniz was a philosopher, a diplomat, a historian, and a mathematician. He traveled widely, wrote thousands of letters, and dreamed of a universal language of reasoning, while exploring problems of curves and areas. Leibniz arrived at a method strikingly similar to Newton's. He, too, had discovered calculus. But unlike Newton, Leibniz published his work. He presented his ideas clearly. He introduced a powerful notation that made the methods easier to use, easier to teach, and easier to extend. The mathematical world took notice. Calculus began to spread. At first, there was no war. Newton knew of Leibniz's work. Leibniz knew of Newton's reputation. There was respect, cautious admiration, and quiet unease. Then suspicion crept in. Newton began to believe that Leibniz had seen his unpublished ideas, that his discovery had been taken, that his intellectual property had been stolen. Leibniz, on the other hand, believed he had arrived at the ideas independently. He had his own notes, his own methods, his own notation, and he was right. But proof is rarely enough when pride is involved. What followed was not a direct confrontation. It was worse, a cold war of mathematics. Letters were written, accusations were implied, committees were formed, and behind the scenes, Newton wielded immense influence. By this time, Newton was no longer just a mathematician. He was a towering figure in English science, a symbol of national pride. When an official investigation was launched into the origins of calculus, Newton quietly ensured that the committee judging the case was dominated by his supporters. The verdict was predictable. Leibniz was declared the plagiarist. Newton was declared the true inventor. Leibniz was devastated. The tragedy is that both men were telling the truth. Newton had discovered calculus first. Leibniz had discovered it independently. Two minds, driven by the same questions, had reached the same revolutionary idea. But history, shaped by power and personality, chose sides. The mathematical community split in England. Mathematicians followed Newton's approach and notation. On the continent, mathematicians followed Leibniz's. This division slowed progress. English mathematics stagnated for decades, isolated by loyalty to Newton's methods. Meanwhile, Leibniz's notation flourished across Europe, becoming the language of calculus that we still use today. Ironically, Newton's brilliance helped hold his country back. There is a deeper lesson hidden in this conflict. Calculus was not owned by either man. It was waiting to be discovered. The world had reached a point where existing mathematics could no longer describe reality accurately. Motion, change, and growth demanded new tools. Newton and Leibniz were both listening to the same problem. They simply heard it at the same time. Newton lived much of his life in conflict, guarding his ideas, fearing criticism, and carrying grudges. Leibniz died largely alone, his reputation damaged, his achievements overshadowed by accusations. He could not fully escape. Neither man truly won, but mathematics did. Calculus transformed science. It made modern physics possible. It unlocked engineering, astronomy, economics, and eventually technology. Every orbit calculated, every bridge designed, every model of change owes something to that moment when two minds touched the same idea. Calculus War reminds us that discovery is not always about originality alone. It is about timing. It is about communication. It is about ego and humility. And sometimes it is about tragedy, because even the most beautiful ideas can be born into conflict if this story moved you. Stay with MathsWhisperer, because mathematics is not just about answers. It is about people, their struggles, their pride, and the ideas that changed the world. Even when the world was not ready to accept them,